Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 251st episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this month's theme is all about pushback. But before we start, have you watched my TEDx talk? It's about the connection between culture, race, and mental health in the workplace. It's something you can watch in your break as it's just 12 minutes long. And the link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. I really hope you enjoy it because it was a labor of love. And if you did enjoy it, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share, and like. Also, don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Right, so if you listened last week, I talked about pushback or the issues with mandatory training. And this week, I want to focus on the pushback around budgets and affordability when it comes to inclusion and mental well-being. Over the last 18 months, I've really heard the following on repeat. We can't afford to spend any money on that. Training, consultancy, keynotes, coaching. There's no budget and there's no money. We have to do this internally and can't spend money externally. EDI isn't a priority. We have an app for mental health support. And interestingly, according to a People Management article published in January 2024, it said that employers said that growing business costs have caused them to reduce their investment in equality, diversity, and inclusion, with the vast majority, 83%, citing operational costs as a factor. What I found, and I knew when I set up my business, is that, of course, this area of work is often the first to be cut, or when businesses experience any kind of pressure, they cut in funding and it no longer becomes a top priority. And it's often only important when there's a bad news story about to erupt about a particular organization or an internal incident, and it's all very reactionary. Now, I do want to caveat one thing and say I do appreciate that small charities, particularly charities working in the area of women's health, women's protection, domestic violence, which predominantly will affect women, small charities maybe based on a specific niche around young people, and smaller organizations, SMEs, and startups. I think money is a challenge, so I do understand that. But there are many, many large organizations who use these excuses a lot. And I think the thing is that poorly trained employees are more likely to feel unappreciated, but also not as skilled as they could be in their job. So there's a likelihood that people might leave and search for better opportunities and or could end up underperforming, quote unquote, as a lack of this upskilling. So while this might not seem like a big problem, high staff turnover is super expensive. And the CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Professional Development, estimates that the average cost of filling a vacancy, including labour costs, is around £6,125. And then if you look at a manager role, middle to senior manager, these figures rise to £19,000. So that's really interesting. So if things really do go wrong and end up in an employment tribunal, let's say, according to a number of solicitors' websites, generally expect that solicitors' fees will be upwards of £10,000, dependent on the complexity of the case and the length of the hearing. So that's just a starter. So when people push back and say we can't afford this £2,000 training, well, actually the minimum you're looking at £6,000, just over if people leave, or a minimum of £10,000 if you have to face an employment tribunal. Now, remember, I'm one of these people. I'm not saying that this is the answer to everything, but of course, if you think about this sensibly, you're looking at value and also creating a really positive workplace where people are upskilled. So let's explore this idea of cost versus value. So cost is the price that you as an organization or department are going to pay for a product or a service. So that could be around software, that could be around IT, that could be around an away day, training, consultancy, etc. But then you've got value. So this is what the product or service is worth to you as in the organization, in your department. So that whole part around we can't afford it is always focused on the cost or the price. But it's a number without thinking about what the positive impact could be, which is the value, or even a crude measure of the cost per head. Often people don't work that out, and I have to sort of say, well, actually, this is my the cost per head. And also you've got to factor in the amount of time that someone is taking to bespoke something for you for a keynote talk or for coaching or, there's always a pre-meet. So coaching is always, it's what people will bring to the session, but you do have to do some pre-work and pre-meet. So an example for me, and don't forget all my pricing is on my website. So half day for me is anything from 30 minutes to 3 hours. And I charge the same because actually the amount of prep for 30 minutes is the same as it is for 3 hours. And I'd rather work with you for longer because I know that that's going to be more valuable. So currently, as we speak, it's £1,500 plus VAT, and that's for an online session and includes all prep work, a 30-minute pre-meet and a 30-minute debrief. So that's up to 25 people. So that equates to just £60 plus VAT per person for a half-day session, or £80 plus VAT per person for a full-day session based on 25 people. Now, does that really break the bank? So often I give people these numbers and I say, okay, you're kind of, there's a collective gasp at the price, but that's how much it is per person for the half and full day. So what if there was one session where people could really discuss inclusive language, for example? So that's one of the sessions I run. So around building consensus in a team, having space to talk about, I feel really uncomfortable saying this. Is it okay to say this? Creating a more positive working environment, coming away with a little bit of an action plan around what they want to take forward in terms of what they learned. And there's far less risk of conflict. It's not perfect. You can't cover everything in, 2 hours, 3 hours, but there's a less of a risk of conflict and an increased likelihood of a positive working environment. Surely that's worth £80 per head versus just over 6K on recruitment, or around £10,000 of minimum in an employment tribunal. And don't forget that, training does equip employees with skills and knowledge necessary to perform their job tasks. So these are things directly related to the role, particularly if you think about managing conversations, managing your team, how it links to the overall organization's efficiency, because you're looking at then resulting in better performance outcomes and increased productivity. And that if people have training related to their job and you work with the right trainer and you make sure that they are the right fit for your organization, it's likely that people feel valued and they're more efficient and competent in their roles. And of course, this then leads to higher productivity levels within the organization. And if you want metrics, there are ways to calculate this. I really hope you're enjoying the content of this podcast and want to keep up to date. If so, why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join my mailing list, you'll receive a free copy of my white paper on inclusive language and mental health. And the link is in the show notes, but I'll give it to you here. It is bit.ly/ILMHCK. So if we think about cost, price versus value, then we can delve deeper into this. I think the first thing is around evaluating the training. So first of all, the training that you need. So that's a learning needs analysis, and then evaluating the effectiveness. So it's, in essence, training effectiveness is the degree to which a training program or session or longer projects achieve its intended goals and desired outcomes. So going back a step, you need to know this and it not be a tick box exercise or a knee reflex into, oh my goodness, this has gone wrong, we need to do it. Because that's very common. We need to do this, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But how are you evaluating it? And clearly something has gone wrong because something wasn't in place in the first instance. So whether that was, a management conversation, whether that was people setting the standards, there being a team charter in place. And it does need to involve looking at the transfer of learning from the training environment into the workplace and assessing any kind of program of work's tangible and intangible benefits. So as a starting point, you could calculate average training time per employee. So that's just looking at the total amount of time a member of staff or your team has spent in training, and dividing this by the number of employees to determine the training time per person. And you can also do that by cost. Then you need to think about how do we align training with the organizational priorities? So maybe you've got an organization strategy. Sometimes it's quite hard to extrapolate from that, but vision, mission, aims, and look at one of those areas and see how this matches, what you've done matches with your organization's strategic priorities. Could be around legislation, any satisfaction surveys of clients, service users, customers, beneficiaries, staff feedback, and any appraisal insights. And then you need to look at also criteria for training success. So this could be, again, the point around value. So we spent this much and this was the value. Trainee feedback. And I think often as well, it's really important to look at where people were in terms of skill and confidence levels and where they ended up. So that can be a really quick 10-point scale question. Where do you feel in terms of confidence in this area, 1 to 10, and then at the end of the session where they feel. So that's a really great way to show distance traveled. You can look at productivity, and if it's relevant relevant to your organization, increased income generation or any kind of grants, trust foundation money that you get. Or also, it could also be how you've saved money in terms of reduced conflict, reduced recruitment costs, etc. So if this is something you're interested to know more about, I can help you with keynotes, workshops, or team coaching sessions. We can have a chat about affordability, and you can email me at Layla, Leyla, @diverseminds.co.uk. I also have a link where you can book in for a free 30-minute meeting to talk more. So really, in essence, what does not affording it really mean? So where's that pushback coming from? What is it that you can't afford? So is it the cost, or is it that you don't think the value that it can offer is aligned to the goals? And what happens if you don't do it? What's the potential cost of recruitment and employment tribunal? Be clear about the goals and the value and move away from the price. And that will also help you find the right person for the job, whether it's internally or externally. If there's a situation where you are not able to go external, you have to do everything internally, how will you upskill staff, and what might be the resources that you need, and how can you create a pitch for getting the expertise you need internally to upskill, getting the expertise you need externally to upskill people internally to deliver a really good standard of service. And consider what those metrics that you want to measure are. If you can show success, you're much more likely to get that funding or support for the projects you want to do. So really hope you've enjoyed the show. And if you have, why not write me a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast from. And I really love to listen to you as listeners. To make this super easy, I've created a place online where you can leave me a voice note anonymously or your name called SpeakPipe. The link is in the show notes and I'll give it to you here. It is bit.ly/SPKPDMP. And the resources from today's episode are the People Management article on Will Diversity and Inclusion Fall Down Business Agendas in 2024, and a monster.co.uk article about resources, work management, planning, employee performance evaluation, how you can measure success of employee training, learning and development. So I really hope you'll join me in the next episode where we'll be closing for this series on why the pushback. Until then, everyone, take care and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.